The morning sun cast long shadows across my backyard as I stood at the kitchen window, coffee mug trembling slightly in my hands, of dreams that had turned into nightmares. The crystal-clear water reflected the oak tree's branches. It had been exactly 18 months since the accident, 18 months since my 8-year-old daughter Emma had slipped on the wet tiles during her birthday party, hitting her head on the pool's edge before falling unconscious into the water. The doctors said she was lucky a concussion and some water in her lungs, but she'd recovered fully. Emma had bounced back with the resilience only children possess, but I never did. Every night since then, I'd wake up in cold sweats, hearing phantom splashes and Emma's terrified screams echoing in my mind. The pool had transformed from a source of joy into a constant reminder of how quickly everything could change, how fragile our happiness really was. My wife Sarah had suggested therapy, and I'd gone, but sitting in that sterile office talking about my fears felt like putting a Band-Aid on a severed artery. "Dad, are you okay?" Emma's voice startled me from my thoughts. She stood in the doorway, her school backpack already strapped on, concern written across her freckled face. At 9 now, she'd developed an uncanny ability to read my moods, a skill no child should need to master. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about some yard work." She studied me for a moment longer, those wise brown eyes seeing too much. "Is it about the pool again?" The directness of her question caught me off guard. We'd never really talked about that day, not properly. Sarah and I had decided to let Emma process it in her own way, but maybe we'd been wrong to shelter her from my struggles. Maybe, I admitted, setting down my coffee cup. "How would you feel if we got rid of it?" Her face lit up with genuine excitement. "Really? Could we get a trampoline instead? Or maybe a vegetable garden like Mrs. Peterson has?" The relief in her voice was unmistakable, and I realized with a pang of guilt that my daughter had been carrying this burden too. She'd stopped asking friends over for pool parties, stopped mentioning swimming lessons, stopped being the water-loving kid she'd always been. In trying to protect her, I'd been blind to how my own trauma was affecting her. "We could do whatever you want," I said, pulling her into a hug. "What do you think Mom will say?" "She'll be happy," Emma said confidently. "She told me last week that she misses seeing you smile." That afternoon, after Emma left for school and Sarah headed to her job at the veterinary clinic, I found myself standing poolside with my phone, scrolling through pool removal companies. The quotes were staggering anywhere from $8,000 to $15,000 to have professionals drain, demolish, and fill the space. We had some savings, but after the medical bills from Emma's accident and the therapy sessions, money was tight. That's when I remembered Jake Morrison, my neighbor from 3 houses down. He'd mentioned during a barbecue last summer that he'd worked construction before becoming an IT consultant. More importantly, he'd helped his brother remove an old pool. From their property in Ohio, I'd always gotten along well with Jake. He was one of those genuine, helpful neighbors who still existed in our suburban landscape. I walked down the street, past the perfectly manicured lawns and matching mailboxes that characterized our neighborhood. Maple Heights had been our dream community when we'd moved in 5 years ago, family-friendly, with an HOA that kept property values high and drama low. At least, that's what we'd thought. Jake answered his door with paint-stained hands and a welcoming grin. "Hey, Michael, what's up? I need some advice," I said, then found myself spilling the whole story. Jake listened without judgment, occasionally nodding in understanding. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Do you know what, Mike? I think we can handle this ourselves. I've got some equipment connections, and my brother-in-law owns a small excavation business. We could probably get this done for a fraction of what those companies quoted you. Are you sure? I mean, I don't want to impose. Are you kidding? I've been looking for a good project. Besides, Emma's a sweet kid, and if this helps your family heal, I'm all in." We spent the next hour planning the project. Jake explained that we'd need to drain the pool first, then carefully remove the liner and any equipment. The concrete would need to be broken up. That's where his brother-in-law's mini excavator would come in handy. Finally, we'd need several truckloads of filled dirt to level the area. "The whole process should take about a week," Jake said. "We'll need to get permits, of course, but that's pretty straightforward." I felt lighter than I had in months. Finally, I was taking action instead of just enduring. That evening, I sat Sarah and Emma down for what I dramatically called a family meeting. Sarah laughed at my serious tone, but her expression grew thoughtful as I explained the plan. "Are you sure this is what you want?" she asked, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "It's a big step." "I'm sure," I said, and for the first time in months, I truly was. This house should be about making memories, not avoiding them. Emma bounced in her chair. "Can we really plant a garden with tomatoes and sunflowers?" "Whatever you want, kiddo." We started by draining the pool, which took longer than expected due to some permit delays. The city inspector was a cheerful man named Rodriguez, who walked us through the requirements and seemed genuinely excited about our project. "You know," he said, "I've seen a lot of these pool removals. Lately, more people are realizing that pools are a lot of work and expense. Plus, your insurance rates will probably go down." As the water level dropped, revealing the pool's full structure for the first time since we'd moved in, I felt a mixture of sadness and anticipation. This pool had been the centerpiece of so many good memories Emma's first swimming lessons, summer barbecues with friends, quiet evening swims with Sarah. But it had also become a prison for my peace of mind. Jake proved to be exactly the kind of neighbor everyone hopes for. He showed up every morning with coffee and a positive attitude, turning what could have been a grueling demolition into something almost enjoyable. We worked methodically, removing the pool equipment piece by piece, carefully disposing of the liner and cleaning materials. "You know," Jake said on the third day as we took a break, "I've been thinking about what you said about Emma. Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for, but they also pick up on our energy more than we realize." "What do you mean?" "Well, you've been carrying this guilt and fear for over a year. Emma's probably been feeling that weight too, even if she doesn't understand it. By removing the pool, you're not just dealing with your trauma, you're showing her that it's okay to make big changes when something isn't working for our family anymore." His words hit me harder than I expected. I'd been so focused on my own healing that I hadn't considered how my example might be teaching Emma about resilience and problem solving. The breakthrough came on Thursday morning. Jake's brother-in-law arrived with a compact excavator, and we began the process of breaking up the concrete. The machine's hydraulic hammer made an incredible racket. But watching those concrete walls crumble felt incredibly therapeutic. Each crack and chunk of debris represented a step away from the paralysis that had gripped me for months. That's when I noticed her. Karen Whitmore lived in the house directly behind ours, and our properties shared a back fence. I'd interacted with her maybe a dozen times since we'd moved, and she was the type of neighbor who waved politely but kept to herself. Middle-aged, impeccably dressed even when gardening, and rumored to be recently divorced. I'd always thought she was harmless, if a bit uptight, but now she was standing at her back door, arms crossed, staring at our demolition work with unmistakable disapproval. Instead, she pulled out her phone and appeared to be taking photos. "Jake," I called over the noise of the excavator, "do you think we're being too loud?" He glanced at his watch. "It's 10:30 in the morning on a Thursday. We checked the noise ordinances. We're well within legal hours." Still, Karen's presence made me uneasy. I walked over to the fence, intending to explain what we were doing and maybe apologize for any inconvenience. "Hi, Karen," I called out. "Sorry about the noise. We're almost done with the loud part." She approached the fence with quick, purposeful steps, her phone still in her hand. "What exactly are you doing to that pool?" "Removing it," I said simply. "It's been a long time coming. Removing it." Her voice rose an octave. "You can't just remove a pool. What about property values? What about the neighborhood aesthetic? Did you get permission from the HOA?" I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. We got all the necessary permits from the city. As for the HOA, I checked the covenants. There's nothing that requires us to maintain a pool. "Well, we'll see about that," she said, then turned and marched back toward her house. Jake had witnessed the entire exchange. "Don't worry about her," he said. "Some people just don't like change." But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of our tea. The weekend brought a deceptive calm. Jake and I finished filling the pool cavity with dirt, and by Sunday evening we were seeding the area with grass. Emma had convinced us to leave a corner section for her garden, and watching her carefully measure out rows for her future vegetables filled me with a contentment I hadn't felt in months. "Look, Dad," she called out, holding up a packet of sunflower seeds. "These ones grow 8 feet tall." "That's going to be quite a sight," I said, imagining our backyard transformed from a sterile pool area into a living garden. Sarah was already planning a small patio where the pool deck had been, complete with a fire pit for cozy family evenings. But Monday morning shattered that peaceful illusion. I was getting ready for work when Sarah called from the kitchen, her voice tight with concern. "Michael, you need to see this." I found her standing at the window, staring into the backyard. My heart sank as I saw what had captured her attention: a man in a suit standing in our yard, taking photographs and measurements with professional equipment. "Who is that?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. "I don't know, but he's been out there for 20 minutes. Should I call the police?" Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find the same suited man, now holding a clipboard and wearing an expression of bureaucratic authority. "Mr. Harrison, I'm David Kellerman from the Maple Heights Homeowners Association. I'm here to conduct an inspection based on a complaint we received regarding unauthorized modifications to your property." My jaw tightened. "What kind of complaint?" "We've received allegations that you've removed a pool without proper HOA approval, potentially violating several covenant restrictions regarding property modifications, aesthetic standards, and the requirement to maintain property values." "I'd like to see the specific covenants you're referring to," I said, filing to keep my voice level. Kellerman consulted his clipboard. Section 4.3 requires homeowners to submit architectural review requests for any modifications that might affect the external appearance of the property or neighborhood character. Section 2.1 addresses maintaining property values, and Section 7.2 covers environmental modifications. And who exactly filed this complaint? I'm not at liberty to say. But the complainant provided detailed documentation and photographs of the alleged violations. Of course she did. I pictured Karen Whitmore hunched over her computer, typing up her grievances with the same meticulous attention to detail she probably applied to organizing her spice rack. "Mr. Kellerman, I researched the covenants thoroughly before beginning this project. There's nothing that specifically requires maintaining a pool, and the modifications we made improve the property's safety and usability." "That's not for you to determine," he said, his tone growing more officious. "The Architectural Review Board will make that decision. In the meantime, you'll need to halt any further work until this matter is resolved." "We're done with the work," I said. "We're just waiting for the grass to grow. Any landscaping or permanent modifications must also be approved. I'm afraid you'll need to cease all activity until we can schedule a hearing." After he left, I stood in my kitchen, feeling the familiar weight of helplessness settling on my shoulders. Sarah wrapped her arms around me from behind. "We'll fight this," she said quietly. "We did nothing wrong." "I know," I said, but doubt was already creeping in. "I just can't believe she's doing this." I realized I'd never explicitly told Sarah about my suspicions regarding Karen. I explained the encounter by the fence, her obvious disapproval, and her convenient presence during the police visit. "That woman has too much time on her hands," Sarah said, her voice taking on an edge I rarely heard. "What kind of person calls the police on their neighbors for removing a pool?" The answer came that afternoon when I got home from work. Emma met me at the door, her face flushed with excitement and anger. "Dad, you won't believe what happened. That mean lady from behind us came over and yelled at Mom." My blood pressure spiked. "What did she say?" Sarah appeared from the kitchen, her expression grim. "Karen showed up about an hour ago. She wanted to discuss the situation, like reasonable neighbors, and she basically demanded that we restore the pool or face legal action. She claims we've damaged her property value and that she's already contacted a real estate attorney." I felt something snap inside me. What it gets worse? She said she's been documenting everything, taking photos, recording our conversations, even timing the construction noise. "She's building a case, Michael." Emma tugged on my sleeve. "She was really mean to Mom, Dad. She made her cry." I looked at Sarah, who was trying to hide the evidence of tears, and felt a rage unlike anything I'd experienced since Emma's accident. But this was different. This wasn't fear or guilt or helplessness. This was righteous anger at someone who was actively trying to hurt my family. "I'm going over there," I said, already heading for the door. "Michael, don't." "I'm not going to threaten her," I said, though my voice probably suggested otherwise. But she needs to understand that this harassment stops now. I marched across the backyard, past the freshly seeded area where our pool used to be, and up to the fence that separated our properties. Karen was in her garden wearing pristine white gloves and tending to her perfectly arranged flower beds. She looked up as I approached, and I saw something in her expression that surprised me, not fear or guilt, but satisfaction. "Karen," I called out, keeping my voice steady despite my anger. "We need to talk." She straightened up, pulling off her gloves with deliberate slowness. "Yes, I suppose we do. You need to stop this harassment. We followed all the proper procedures. We have all the necessary permits, and what we do with our property is none of your business." "Oh, but it is my business," she said, moving closer to the fence. "Your little demolition project has directly impacted my property value. Do you have any idea what a house with a pool sells for compared to one without? That's not our problem, isn't it?" Her voice was rising now, and I could see neighbors starting to take notice. "I bought this house specifically because it backed up to a property with a pool. It was part of the aesthetic appeal, part of what made this neighborhood desirable. And now you've turned it into, what, a dirt patch?" "It's going to be a garden," I said, feeling ridiculous for having to explain this to her. "A garden," she laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Do you know what gardens attract? Rodents, insects, noise from maintenance equipment, and let's not even talk about the smell when you start composting." I stared at her, trying to process the level of entitlement and selfishness in her words. "Karen, this is insane. You're talking about calling lawyers and filing complaints because we removed a pool from our own property." "I'm talking about protecting my investment," she said, her voice taking on a cold, calculating tone. "I'm talking about maintaining the standards that make this neighborhood worth living in. I'm talking about preventing people like you from dragging down everyone else's property values with your impulsive decisions. People like me. People who make emotional decisions without considering the broader impact. People who think they can just tear down whatever they want because they can't handle a little adversity." The words hit me like a physical blow. She knew somehow. She knew about Emma's accident, about my struggles, about the real reason we'd removed the pool. "How do you? This is a small neighborhood, Michael. People talk. Word gets around about families that can't handle their responsibilities." I felt my hands clenching into fists. "You don't know anything about my family." "I know enough. I know that instead of dealing with your problems like an adult, you decided to take the easy way out. And now you expect the rest of us to just accept the consequences of your weakness." "That's enough," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous level. "You stay away from my family. You stop harassing my wife. You stop filing frivolous complaints, and you mind your own business." "Or what?" she challenged. "You'll call the police. You'll threaten me. That would just prove my point about what kind of neighbors you really are." I stood there, trembling with rage, and the realization that she was right about one thing: any escalation on my part would only make things worse for my family. She had me trapped, and she knew it. "This isn't over," I said immediately, regretting how clitched it sounded. "No," she agreed, already turning back to her flower beds. "It's not." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation with Karen over and over. Sarah slept fitfully beside me, occasionally murmuring in her dreams. Around 3 a.m., I gave up and went to the kitchen to make coffee. That's when I saw the light. Karen's house was lit up like a Christmas tree, every window glowing against the darkness. I could see her silhouette moving from room to room, and I realized she was probably having as much trouble sleeping as I was. But where my insomnia came from, stress and worry, hers seemed to come from a different source entirely. I stood at the window, watching her pace back and forth, and began to wonder what kind of life she led. Recently divorced, according to neighborhood gossip, no children that I'd ever seen, a house that looked perfect from the outside, but felt empty somehow. Was her obsession with our pool removal really about property values, or was it about some... The first shot in our counteroffensive came at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I was loading my laptop bag for work when I heard voices outside, multiple voices, engaged in what sounded like a heated discussion. Peering through the front window, I saw something that made my heart race. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk in front of our house. Jake was there, along with Mrs. Chen from next door, the Thompsons from across the street, and surprisingly, old Mr. Rodriguez from the corner house. They were all looking at something, and their body language suggested they were not happy. Grabbed my coffee and headed outside, bracing myself for whatever new catastrophe Karen had orchestrated. "Michael," Mrs. Chen called out as soon as she saw me. "Have you seen this?" She thrust a piece of paper into my hands, a professionally printed flyer with the heading, "Protect Our Neighborhood Values," in bold red letters. Below that was a photo of our backyard, taken from Karen's house, showing the dirt-covered area where the pool used to be. The caption read, "Is this the future of Maple Heights?" My hands trembled as I read the rest of the flyer. "Fellow homeowners, our neighborhood is under threat. Irresponsible property modifications like the one pictured above are already impacting our property values. The Harrison family has removed their pool without proper community consultation, creating an eyesore that affects us all. Join us at an emergency HOA meeting this Thursday at 7 p.m. to discuss new regulations that will protect our investments and maintain the standards that make Maple Heights a desirable place to live." At the bottom, in smaller text, paid for by the Maple Heights Property Values Coalition. "She's calling herself a coalition now," Jake said, reading over my shoulder. "It gets worse," Mr. Rodriguez said, his weathered face creased with disgust. "She's been going door to door with these things telling people that your pool removal. She's claiming that if the HOA doesn't crack down now, other people will start removing their pools, or worse, turning their yards into urban farming communes." Urban farming communes. I couldn't hide my disbelief. Her words, not mine. He said, "She also suggested that property modifications like yours tend to attract a certain type of family that doesn't share traditional neighborhood values." The implications of that statement hit me like a physical blow. Karen wasn't just attacking our property modification, she was attacking us personally, trying to paint us as outsiders who didn't belong in Maple Heights. "That's disgusting," Sarah said, appearing beside me with Emma in tow. She'd obviously heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. "Mom, what's wrong?" Emma asked, picking up on the tension in the air. "Nothing, sweetheart," I said automatically, but Emma was too smart to buy that. "Is it about the mean lady again?" Mrs. Chen knelt down to Emma's level. "Don't worry about grown-up stuff, honey. Sometimes adults have disagreements, but it doesn't mean anything bad is going to happen." But as I looked around at the concerned faces of my neighbors, I wasn't so sure. Karen's flyer was professionally designed and persuasively written. If she was willing to go this far, what else was she capable of? The answer came that afternoon when I got home from work. Sarah met me at the door, her face pale and her hands shaking. "Michael, she's escalated again. She's filed a formal complaint with the state contractor licensing board against Jake, claiming he performed unlicensed work, and she sent a letter to our homeowners insurance company claiming that our unsafe construction practices have created a liability risk for the neighborhood." I felt the blood drain from my face. "She can't do that. She already has. Jake got a call from the state board this morning. They're opening an investigation. What about the insurance? Our agent called an hour ago. They're not dropping our coverage, but they want to send an inspector to assess any potential liability issues with our property modifications." I sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the complexity of Karen's attacks. She wasn't just fighting us on one front, she was opening multiple battles simultaneously, forcing us to defend on several fronts, while she remained free to launch new attacks. "There's more," Sarah said quietly. "Emma came home from school upset today. Apparently, some of the other kids have been saying things about us, about how we're troublemakers who don't follow the rules. Kids are just repeating what they hear at home," I said, but the implication was Claire Coren's campaign was affecting our daughter's social life. "What are we going to do?" Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see Jake standing on our porch, but he wasn't alone. Behind him were several other neighbors, including some I didn't recognize. I opened the door to find what could only be described as a delegation. Jake introduced them quickly. The Patel family from 2 streets over, the Johnsons who lived near the park, and Maria Santos, a real estate agent who lived in the neighborhood. "We need to talk," Jake said. All of us, we gathered in our living room, and I found myself looking at faces that ranged from supportive to concerned to downright angry. But their anger, I realized, wasn't directed at us. "I got one of those flyers too," Mrs. Patel said without preamble. "And I have to say, I'm disgusted by what that woman is trying to do to your family. It's not just the flyers," Mr. Johnson added. "She's been going door to door, spreading rumors about you, and trying to get people to sign some kind of petition." "What kind of petition?" I asked. Maria Santos spoke up. "She's trying to get signatures for a special assessment to fund legal action against you. She's claiming that your property modifications have created liability issues for the entire HOA." I felt my jaw drop. "She wants our neighbors to pay for her legal fees." "That's not even the worst part," Jake said. "Tell them about the meeting." Maria shifted uncomfortably. "I went to the HOA meeting she called for tonight. She had maybe 15 people there, but she was very organized. She's proposing new covenant restrictions that would require HOA approval for any property modifications, including landscaping changes." "Landscaping changes?" Sarah asked. "She's specifically targeting things like vegetable gardens, compost areas, and what she calls non-traditional yard uses. She's trying to make it impossible for anyone to do what you did." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Karen wasn't just trying to punish Ushi, was trying to reshape the entire neighborhood's rules to prevent anyone else from making similar changes. "But here's the thing," Mrs. Patel said, leaning forward. She's overplayed her hand. "A lot of people are getting tired of her tactics." "What do you mean?" "She approached Mrs. Henderson about signing her petition," Mr. Johnson explained. "Mrs. Henderson has been gardening in her backyard for 30 years. When Karen suggested that vegetable gardens might need HOA approval, Mrs. Henderson told her where she could put her petition. Despite everything, I found myself smiling. Mrs. Henderson was a sweet elderly woman who made the best tomato sauce in the neighborhood. The idea of her telling Karen off was oddly satisfying." "So, what are you suggesting?" I asked. "We fight back," Jake said simply. "Not just defensively, but we organize our own campaign. We show the neighborhood that Karen's vision of mandatory conformity isn't what most people want." "How do we do that?" Maria pulled out a folder. "I've been doing some research. Property values in neighborhoods with diverse landscaping and home modifications actually tend to be higher than those with strict aesthetic controls. The idea that every house needs to look identical is outdated. Plus," Mrs. Patel added, "a lot of people are interested in sustainable living these days. Gardens, composting, rainwater collection. These aren't eyesores, they're improvements. So we start our own campaign," Sarah said thoughtfully. "We show people that our changes represent progress, not problems." "Exactly," Jake said. "But we need to be smart about it. Karen's been effective because she's been organized and strategic. We need to be more organized and more strategic." Over the next hour, we developed a plan that was both ambitious and risky. We would organize our own neighborhood meeting, but instead of focusing on complaints and restrictions, we would showcase positive changes and community benefits. We would invite experts to talk about sustainable landscaping, property value impacts, and the benefits of diverse neighborhoods. "The key," Maria said, "is to make this about vision, not just reaction. We're not just defending your right to remove a pool. We're advocating for a neighborhood that embraces positive change." "What about the immediate threats?" I asked. "The contractor licensing investigation, the insurance issues, the HOA complaints?" "We handle those too," Jake said, "but we do it as part of a broader strategy. Every time Karen attacks us, we use it as an opportunity to show people how unreasonable she's being." As the meeting broke up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Not just hope that we could survive Karen's attacks, but hope that we could actually win this fight. But that hope was tested the very next morning. I woke up to find our front yard had been vandalized. Someone had spray-painted pool killers across our driveway and scattered trash across our lawn. But what really made my blood boil was what they'd done to Emma's garden. They'd trampled the seedlings and dumped some kind of chemical that had killed the grass we'd just planted. Emma discovered the damage first. I found her standing